Good to see you all again. Welcome to the EOcafe. This is the 72nd time that we've met with the EO community in this forum. So just simply welcome to everybody. Just a reminder to you of the rules for the EOcafe. Please put your name and affiliation in the against your picture. Keep your microphones off, please, unless I ask you to join the conversation. But please feel free to leave your cameras on. It's always good to see people, and it adds to the ambience. If you want to ask a question, please just drop it into the chat. I still want to ask you to pose that question, but if it's in the chat, then we've got a chance just to think about it. And sometimes questions are answered independently, etc., etc. So I would generally come back to you and say if you've got an answer. I think that's about it for the rules. Hopefully everyone's got a coffee. Just finished mine, unfortunately. So let's get started. And today, an old friend of mine from a friend of mine from a long time ago. Sounds a bit better, doesn't it, Artie?
I was going to say we're old friends. Are you going to tell everybody where we first met?
No, I can ask you to do that. Artie and I go back a long time in Brussels, and Artie's recently been appointed as director of the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, which was the subject for our discussion today about UNOOSA, what the role is, what the mandate is, how they interact with other bodies, etc., etc. And I often make the point that we have a lot of new people coming into the business. We see a lot of new names coming in, and one of the things we try to do in the EOcafe, if it's appropriate, is to try to help build a picture of the landscape, because people don't understand, how these organisations fit together and what their roles are, etc., etc. So I'm pleased that we should do that today. So if you have any questions around that, then please just join in, put them into the chat. But I will be trying to anticipate a lot of those questions anyway. So the UN, well, no, Artie, as I said, we go back a long time. I'm not quite sure when we first met. I've got a fairly good idea, but maybe you've got a better idea than I do. But maybe just how do you get to be director of UNOOSA? What's your background? What's your skills, etc.? Artie.
Thank you. Thank you, first of all, for inviting me. And Jeff, I was really pleasantly surprised to know that you run the EOcafe and that we get a chance to speak again.
I'm still alive, yeah.
Well, I didn't think it was that bad, but I thought you'd retired. So it's nice to see that you're still active and doing what you do best. So yeah, we met back in, I think we met when I first came to Brussels in 2000. Yeah, so I was raised in the UK. I was a solicitor in the UK. I studied law with German law, and then I went off to do an MBA in Paris. And when I started the MBA, the HEC, the school where I did it, they actually called me and they said, "Look, you've passed all of the exams, etc., but we really recommend that you think twice before accepting the offer, because we think that you have one of the profiles with the least work experience, and we're scared you won't find a job, or it'll take you a long time to find a job." So there you are. That was how I got into the MBA.
Welcome.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I started anyway, and we started in September, and in October there was a German fair in Paris where the German companies came, and one of them was Daimler-Benz Aerospace, and they invited me for an assessment center. And I remember sitting in the plane with that was almost when there was not much internet, and I had a dictionary and I was looking up aerospace because I thought I knew what it meant, but I didn't really know what it meant. And I got there 3 days of assessment center, and by the end of it I thought, wow, this is cool. And I was the first person in the MBA year to actually be offered a job, and because they put the fear of God into me that I'd never find one, I said yes. And so
that was DASA, wasn't it?
That was DASA. That was Daimler-Benz Aerospace, or MBB, in Munich, in Ottobrunn.
Yeah.
And so I was there for 3.5 years. And then our mutual friend, Evert Dudok, was looking for a English-speaking legal background person who could possibly speak French to go to Brussels to be the Astrium Germany representative in Galileo Industries in the joint venture. And so I took that and did 4 years in Brussels as Galileo Industries. Everybody else, it was Alcatel, Spas, Alenia Spazio, Astrium UK, and ultimately GSS, Galileo Sistemas y Servicios. Everybody had one person, and after 1 year, the others went back, but I didn't. I had met my mate, if you will. I met my husband on my second day in Brussels. And so after 1 year, there was no going back for me. I was staying in Brussels. And so I wound up running the office, if you will, for the next few years, much to the dislike of Alenia and Alcatel, who after 4 years said, send her back to Brussels. They made a big fuss with Astrium, but that wasn't happening. So I went from navigation to satellite telecoms and became the Secretary General of then the European Satellite Operators Association. In fact, you played an instrumental role there as well, if I remember well, Jeff. And
You say so.
yeah. You connected me with Christine Lecamp back then. So yeah, I went there, and that was in 2004. After 10 years, we went from European to EMEA. We expanded to EMEA, got 11 new satellite operators, and in 2022, we went global. So for 1 year, I was Secretary General of the Global Satellite Operators Association, GSOA. And that was enough. I mean, I had been there for almost 19 years. I felt that I didn't need to do a single thing more to leave a legacy. And it was time for a new challenge. So I had actually applied for this position maybe a year before I left. But you know, the UN jobs, you can be waiting for quite some time. But it finally came through, and I was very surprised by that. I did actually do a small stint with North Star, Canadian company, which should be launching its sensors into space in 2 days' time. So to work on SSA, space situational awareness. So which is a nice segue to come into this role, which is more focused on governance and these kind of issues as well. So that's how we wound up in UNOOSA.
How you're in UNOOSA, director of UNOOSA. That's great, and I mean that should be an inspiration to new people coming into the business, especially new women coming into the business. I'd love to go back and talk a little bit about the global and the history of the telecoms, but that's not the point of today. We want to talk about UNOOSA and give people an idea. And UNOOSA is one of those organisations that sits there, and we've been aware of it, had interactions with UNOOSA over the years with various people. I've been to Vienna and presented in Vienna. But it's never quite clear what role UNOOSA is playing. You know, the UN is one of these enormous organizations with lots of pieces, many different parts of it using satellite data. And we'll come back onto that. And as a general, as you talk about governance, and agree that a big governance role. So let's simply start off by, okay, you're new to the job, but tell us what UNOOSA is. What's its mandate? What does it do?
Yeah, I think this is a story which hasn't been told well enough. In the past, indeed, when I was in industry, I knew that UNOOSA existed. I knew COPUS existed, COPUS being the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. But for all intents and purposes, it was irrelevant to what we were doing outside of Vienna or, you know, in the rest of the space world. I didn't see how it was relevant. I was reminded when I actually got here that I'd actually presented to COPUS back in 2012 on the Space Data Association. So yeah, but what does it do? It has, so UNOOSA was formed in 1960. So you know, like 9 years before I was born, even.
Before the Beatles, even.
There you go. And it was formed as the secretariat to COPUS, to this committee. And it continues, that remains its first its prime role. We have a mandate from the UN General Assembly to act as the secretariat for COPUS, and that's where I think my background fits quite well. You're still kind of being secretariat to a member-driven organization. It's just that now it's not industry, now it's member states, which of course is fundamentally different. But the other part of our mandate is very much to implement various programs. So you have the Space Applications Program, you have UN SPIDER, which is space-based information for disaster and emergency response, and other capacity building activities for member states. So supporting them in the use of space data, space solutions, raising awareness with them, just doing what we can for space. In coming here, I think for me, really coming from the outside and cold, if you will, to this job, what do I know about the UN? For me, the UN 2030 agenda, the UN SDGs, everybody knows that. We are the only part of the UN Secretariat which is entirely dedicated to space. So for me, we are the custodian of space for the Sustainable Development Goals on behalf of the Secretary General. And so while the Secretariat role is fundamental because COPUS is the birthplace of all of the treaties, principles, guidelines, and conventions, recommendations, what have you, on space governance, given the situation that we as a people find ourselves, not European, but globally today, in today's world, I think that other role of being, the custodian of space for the SDGs couldn't really be overstated. I think one has to really focus on that.
There's several things that I want to come back on, but just firstly, COPUS. That's your body where you interact with the UN members.
And COPUS brings together 102 out of the 193 member states. It's not all of them, and that's another thing where I think one has to tell a much better story. I think there is a perception among non-spacefaring nations that, oh, well, I don't have a satellite, why should I be there? Whereas everybody's voice, every country should have their voice heard on space governance and space sustainability, and should also have access to all of the programs and stuff that we do. And they do. You don't have to be a COPUS member to benefit from our capacity building, but you will have far better information if you are part of COPUS because of we have 3 sessions a year. So COPUS has a plenary meeting in June, which is, I think, 10 days or 2 weeks of meeting. And it has 2 subcommittees. One is the scientific and technical subcommittee, which deals with long-term sustainability guidelines and so on. And then you have the legal subcommittee, which the first committee will meet starting next week for 10 days. A month and a half later, you have the legal subcommittee, again meeting for 10 days, and then you have the plenary meeting in June. So we have these cycles every year. The beginning of every year is the COPUS cycle, and then it carries on working until the following year.
And because I think this is the way it works in GGIM, the meeting's always on the same date every year.
Oh, you're asking me too much there. I don't know.
Sorry. I'm always amazed.
I've never been to one yet.
UNGGI. No, I mean the meetings can be on a Sunday because it's that date every year. Maybe they've changed it since I was interacting there. Okay, so that's your first KPI then, to increase the participation in COPUS from 100.
I would say so. Yeah. I think that's fundamental because because our sector, and especially the broad topic of space governance, is so directly affected by the geopolitics of today. It's imperative that you have as many countries as you can coming to Vienna, which is the historical seat of that, the body of knowledge and where that collects, because otherwise you risk proposals strategically or tactically being sent straight to New York under the premise that, oh, well, this is so important, it should go to all UN member states, when in fact the knowledge on space is not in New York. It's the permanent missions here, it's the space attaches here,
I mean, it certainly feels as though now is the time for a new look at governance of space globally. You know,
Mhm.
we have so many sort of international missions, missions that are ambitions of outer space, not just near Earth space. Um, Plus issues of, you mentioned earlier, surveillance and space surveillance, satellite constellations. There seem to be a number of topics there that, well, I guess you'll get your teeth into. How do you view that?
Um, uh, how do I view it going, or what do you mean?
Yeah, what's your perspective of sort of the role that the UN UNOOSA going forward now, with this say this geopolitical picture, this sort of much more complex utilization of space, much more intensive utilization of space. Not to mention, of course, getting onto security and defense issues. But
Yes. So I think there's your question actually has two parts. One is how do we see the future of UNOOSA? One is also where is COPUS going to go against this background?
yeah.
And I would say UNOOSA's focus is largely on the capacity building side, and so space for the SDGs more broadly. And there we always have, well, always, we in the broad scheme of things, we have consensus. So I don't think there's a problem there. I think the only problem we have is that we are under-resourced, under-recognized, and probably therefore don't have the respect that we should have given our mandate.
Mm,
But I'm confident that we can turn that around.
mm,
With the right narrative, with a coherent strategy that resonates with member states where they see their own priorities reflected and so on. When it comes to COPUS, however, I think one has to, again, I think our role is to provide thought leadership and to proactively promote a common positive agenda amongst the member states and remind them why we're all here. If we think back to the very first treaty, the Outer Space Treaty, which was adopted by COPUS, it was driven by Russia and the US during the Cold War. And it was put together against that backdrop, very much putting the interests of mankind at its center. And despite the wars, they managed to make progress on that. And we see that if we take a pragmatic approach and we don't lose sight of those broader interests that really do bind us,
mm.
especially in the wake of climate change and all of these horrible consequences that we're feeling everywhere. I think there is good chances to make progress, but the challenge is to ensure that meetings are not politicized, that they stay focused on things that one can proactively do, and we can. So the last few years have been challenging, but even against that background, even though it took 10 years, the COPUS did manage to adopt the long-term sustainability guidelines. And there are some of them which were outstanding, needed more discussion, which are still being discussed. New topics like space resources are also being discussed.
Okay.
Member states continue to bring issues to us, and they continue to be addressed.
Okay. Okay. So that's you talked about space application program, which is something new to me. I don't think I've heard that before. What's that about?
It's also new to me, but the whole job is new to me, right? I've only been here 3.5 months, or 4 months now. We do various activities, but some of them are arguably a little more application oriented or even operational than others. And the Space Applications Program, along with UN Spider, are those two.
Hmm.
So within space applications, we have various activities like Space for Water, which is to support specifically SDG 6, the access to clean water and sanitation and so on and so forth. We have other things, space for women, space for climate change, very many different things that fall largely within the Space Applications Program. What I would say is that in coming to this office, I see that there has not necessarily been a coherent strategy that thought through, okay, what are the broad space applications that need to be prioritized, and how should we as an office work on them? And that is the approach that we're trying to do now by presenting a new strategy to the membership. To date, the activities have been driven by donors. So member states or NGOs even have said, we would like the office to work on this. We will give you X amount of money to work on this for the next 2 years, for the next 5 years. And Space for Water is one of those examples. So even though water is arguably one of the biggest issues confronting the UN in the next 10, 15 years, it's not necessarily backed by multiple member states per se. It's backed by one NGO, which said, we want you to work on this. And it's become quite big because of that, right?
Okay.
Then you have other, so that is not under a specific dedicated mandate from the UN General Assembly. Take another one, global health, that has been mentioned in the General Assembly. That's again within space application that we need to work on that to promote healthcare for all globally, less developing countries and so on. UN Spider, on the other hand, is a program which again it has the mandate from the General Assembly. So what is the difference? The difference is that when something comes under a mandate from the General Assembly, then it comes with allocated budget. When it doesn't, then it is subject to XB, extra budget, which is donations, contributions.
Donors, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So the space application program, I mean, you've mentioned UN Spider, which tends to be quite a strong focus for one of the primary users of EO data within the UN. The UN GGIM, which is not so much a user, but I think an enabler, if I'm right. There are other parts of the UN which are consumers of Earth observation. How do these are these coordinated? Is there anything that fits these together? What happens in the broader picture there?
So, as you know, my background's in SATCOMs, not in Earth observation. But what I've learned so far about this is, and what I see is that we have multiple parts of the UN system who are making use of space data. If we think about this historically, even though UNOOSA was set up way beyond some of the other initiatives that are using this data, I mean, back in 1960, it was set up with this mandate of being secretariat to COPUS. So nobody really viewed it from the capacity building side of things. And I think as a result of that, we see the other parts of the UN, be it the environmental program, be it the World Food Program, FAO, and others who use Earth observation data, they had one specific mandate, and so they grew doing what they needed to do to deliver on their mandate. And I don't think that has changed much. So what we see today is a fragmented approach to the acquisition of space data. We are, however, trying to improve the data acquisition and the management. We work with the other UN entities. We are active within the UN Geospatial Network. We also lead something called UN Space, which is the interagency mechanism to coordinate any parts of the UN, be it parts of the UN Secretariat or specialized agencies who have an interest in space. And so we are seen already as the focal point within the UN system to help establish commercial contracts, in-kind contributions, and so on. So I don't know if you know, but the UN, you probably do, it's just new to me, but the UN has certain, for want of a better word, framework contracts to acquire satellite imagery. And we have built on that with dedicated agreements, MOUs with certain providers. And when we do that, we try to do it to reduce the cost of accessing high resolution commercial data. And we also try to do it with the mindset of, okay, let's do this under a multi-user license, so that we don't see these projects, coming with a single use license, and then you have a project which is essentially shelved because it wasn't negotiated correctly, right? So that's what we are trying to do. I think going forward, there is a call on us. I think the dedicated entities who are making use of this data do not want to assume the role of being the focal point for the UN for the acquisition of data. So they do look to us, as we're the only ones on space, to play that role and to have some kind of a coordination role. And from what I understand, that's even welcomed by industry, who Laurent, who's on this call, and who's a focal point within the geospatial network, informs me that industry is often inundated with requests from different parts of the system and don't necessarily know, okay, which one do they prioritize, and so they would welcome a single interface. So that's something that we're looking at right now.
Yeah, I know. I think that's very much the case, that industry would welcome to have somebody they know, who they can talk to, that they can trust, that they can establish a sort of relationship with, rather than, as you say, getting calls from offices everywhere saying, can you supply this, and and then having to sort of deal with all those different requests.
Yeah, I think the irony of it, Jeff, is that when you look at some of these specialized agencies, they actually have far more remote sensing and Earth observation experts than we do.
Yeah.
And so we should not try to now come in and retrospectively assume the role that we would have done was it conceived differently from the start. I think the UN is at, as a whole, the multilateral process and the UN is at an inflection point against all the instability in the world, where people are asking, what is your relevance? And so efficiency has got to be built into whatever we do. So we should add value where we can, not seek to duplicate, but adding value can not only be a coordination role, it can also be driving down the costs, pooling resources, and so on and so forth.
Well, and connecting people. I see partly as a sort of bridge, where one department is saying, oh, well, I've heard about this new technique. Does anyone know about it? And understanding to be able to put people together where there is a benefit. Okay, that's good. So I mean that's sort of looking intern to the UN. There are also other bodies outside the UN, like the CEOS, the space agencies that meet together in CEOS, GEO, specifically for Earth observation. There are similar organizations. You mentioned the GSOA, which is, of course, it's a trade association. But I mean, we're talking about public organizations which have roles which to a certain extent overlap or complement with the UN. How do you work with these other bodies?
So I believe that when it comes to the UN system, there we have a good coordination ongoing. We also have great relations with these other bodies, CEOS and GEO that you mentioned. And in the forthcoming committee meetings, we have bilaterals lined up to see how can those relationships be enhanced. But I think important to remember that when it comes to the UN, we really are the only one exclusively dedicated to space. So I am keen that we should deliver on what is expected of us. And since I took office in September, we've had about, I don't know, 65, 70 bilaterals with different member states. And when it comes to Earth observation and climate action, very clear messages coming. This is interesting. So I have some countries, like the BRICS nations, who are working together on a new constellation for Earth observation, who really want to make sure that that data is put in the service of the SDGs and made available to LDCs, less developed countries. And then I was saying how we don't tell the story well enough. And that's true. I mean, I in the events that I've been to so far, including COP, I was giving examples of rooting out illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing, thanks to using SAR data, or talking about how last year, I think it was 40 illegal raids in Brazil to prevent deforestation, which you could only do because of high resolution SAR data. right? And I had African countries coming to me and saying, this is all very nice, but we can't afford this data. So you have this dichotomy where you have a lot of data being generated, being created. You have the suppliers of that data wanting to make it available under varying conditions and so on. And then you have people who really want it. But obviously there's a gap. So for me, if people are saying, how can UNOOSA help, then clearly something needs to be done. And I said, for me, it's about thought leadership. It's about pragmatism. It's about avoiding duplication. So we will act where we see that the need is. And that is being articulated reasonably well. So I think we're identifying important questions like how do you bridge this gap between supply and demand? And so I think that's where UNOOSA probably needs to see where it can add value. And because we are a very small office, I don't know if I mentioned, we are 35 people at this point, only 25 of which are on UN budget. The rest are secondees from member states. So because we are such a small office, we never be able to do these things by ourselves. We can coordinate, we can lead, we can provide thought leadership even, and we can drive efficiencies. But it's only through partnering and seeing how do we pool our strengths and our competencies and marry our different mandates that I think we will move the needle on this. Specifically, I said about negotiating new agreements. I think there's an important role to play to promote the different data which is available. And that's where industry has a really important role to play. If they come to us and say we would like to explore a partnership and we have this data to offer, and they may be willing to, under a CSR program, make it available. For example, during disasters or crises, that could be one way which we could then start promoting that. At the same time, pooling the resources from donors and UN entities. There's a lot of money flowing into different entities, and a lot of it is directed to procurement of this kind of data. So we can help streamline that. And I think another one which we haven't mentioned is, because we engage with so many member states, we run technical advisory missions, we run institutional strengthening missions. We can collect user requirements. We learn about the needs on the ground. So I think there's an important role to play there, also in feeding giving that feedback back to the providers of data.
Which is exactly what I was going to follow up with. How do you provide that feedback? Is there any structural mechanism which you can inform the companies, the industry, that we see this need coming up, we need more of this. This is not so performant, but if it could do this, that would help a lot. Is there a mechanism for that?
So for me, the first thing is to create the mechanism to gather that, to collate that feedback. Because what we do is, right now, we do technical advisory missions, whether it's on space law, where we send a team for a full week out to a member state or to a group of member states, and you literally do scenario-based exercises based on they're tailored to their actual situation. Similarly, within Spider, similar things happen. Laurent, Juan Carlos, and the members of Spider team, they go out there, they coordinate 8-9 ministries at one time, bringing them together, understanding the different needs, and so on. But so there's a lot of work going on, and that needs to. I think it could be useful to create some kind of an observatory where we collect what are the burning needs, and there's got to be similarities, or I'm sure many member states have overlaps in the needs that they have.
Oh, for sure.
What I did last year was I announced something called the UNOOSA Space Bridge, because I explained to you earlier, we have this COPUS cycle, which is like the first half of the year, and then COPUS it doesn't adjourn, but it goes away to work on its various activities and its work program, and then it convenes again the following year. Industry is not in COPUS. Therefore, for me, there is an important gap between member states on the one hand, industry on the other to bridge, space, non-space to bridge. space agencies and COPUS delegates, or space agencies and telecoms regulators. Spectrum's another big issue that we should probably discuss. Right, there's many silos that need to be broken down to ensure the correct flow of information and to ensure expertise is shared as widely as possible, and this includes the availability of data and how to access it, how to implement it, how to interpret it, and so on. So I think there's definitely work that we can do to ensure that relevant information flows back to your community, and we can take an action from this to liaise with the Spider colleagues to see how to do that better.
Well, clearly we're happy to help organize from the industrial side, and we have 130 members across Europe who would be very interested to at least be able to listen to a dialogue, whether that's directly or through ERSC, through trade associations. I think can be discussed, but that could be an interesting outcome, I think, to strengthen this, provide a mechanism for bringing back the needs that you're understanding and bringing expertise in how those needs can be met. Okay. We've got a question from Julio Costella, which is quite close to my own heart. So Julia, pardon, sorry, Julia. Come in and put your question directly.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Yes, it's Julia. I know it's difficult to pronounce.
My problem is seeing the screen from a bit far away. It's reading the.
Oh, okay. That's okay. Don't worry. Yeah. So my question was about creating a knowledge repository of impact, especially quantitative and economic impact of the let's say, the benefit of your applications, right, for addressing global challenges, because this is really linked to what you said about having together non-experts with industry, with government that are not really aware of the value, of your applications. So it would be very useful to have kind of repository where they can go and say, oh, this is my problem, this is the issue I have, how can I solve it, and what can satellite really do, what is the evidence of the benefit of space applications. We've been working let's say to create this in my organization I work for, Caribou Space. It's an advisory company, but it's a very big, let's say, task. So I was hoping. I mean, I would like to ask you if you are aware if anything similar exists, or if UNOOSA could do something about creating this.
Sure. I would invite Laurent to come in whenever he knows more than what I say, but we have been working with the European Space Agency on a space solutions compendium precisely to show the impact of different space solutions. It's not focused on Earth observation, it's broader, to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. There was a pilot last year, and it will go live online this year. And there's an open invitation to anybody who would like to feed case studies into that. Now, I remember saying that, and then I think one of my staff members said, actually, it's for member states. So I don't know whether it's where industry can feed in case studies or if it's only for member states. I don't know, but that does exist. Now, you asked about specifically the quantitative and economic impact. I don't know if it goes that far. I fear not. In my ignorance, I say that. I fear not. And I do think generally, and also coming from my previous post, that as an industry, the space sector is really bad at collecting metrics on its impact. Not necessarily at fault per se, because very often the services that we provide, how do you quantify their value? You know, so much of what we do is in the humanitarian space or whatever. Then you're talking about quantifying the value of saving a human life at time of disaster. That's not obvious. But I'm sure there's a way of doing better on that. And I think we need to, especially because we see that the spectrum that is used for so many of these services is increasingly exposed.
Mm.
So I think there's a lot of merit in looking more into your suggestion. Thank you.
It's a good related point at the end there, given the battle for the SAR frequency.
Mm-hmm.
I can't let that drop without drawing attention to the work that we do in what's called the Sentinel Benefits Studies, where we actually do look at the quantification of the benefits. Everybody's interested in the numbers, so we do try to come up with numbers in the millions of euros of the benefits of using a particular service in a particular way. And there are 25, 30 reports on that on our on the SEBS website. That work is also connected into a group which is a fairly informal ad hoc group called GeoValue, which is sort of partly under the umbrella of Geo. It's not exclusively, but and that's us working with US and Canadians mainly, but also Japanese and Australian and South African, who are interested in exactly that question, you know, quantifying the benefits. But the interesting thing is that it's not always the quantifiable benefits that are most interesting. Sometimes the softer benefits are more interesting for public authorities, particularly, than the numbers. So that I had to throw that one in. So please, if you have any questions, please pop them into the chat, and we can take them. In the meantime, I want to sort of come back on this question, because you talked about working with CEOS and Geo, etc. But I wonder if I think you said you still have to have bilaterals with both organizations. But it seems to me there's a lot that could be done to sort of take benefit of the networks that those organizations are running in dealing with UN, the issues that you're trying to deal with in UNOOSA. So that's perhaps a personal view.
Definitely. We already coordinate with other relevant entities under both the geospatial network, but also UN space. So whether it's peacekeeping, UNDP, WFP, UN for Women, ITU, WHO, UNESCO unit, all of these lot, we already work with them. But there's always it's always good to collaborate and see it's important to be more than the sum of individual parts. So
yeah. Which can be hard to do. It can be hard to do that. You've had that experience in the trade association, and sometimes like herding cats. Okay. Yes. No. Again, if so. Okay. Question for the following on from the last one. Jan Hush. How for industry to be in contact? How do you prefer to interact with industry? I guess it could be a rephrasing of that.
All right. So we do a lot of workshops and awareness raising conferences, which are organized under the UN umbrella. We had the World Space Forum in December, which we'll be organizing again this December in Germany. We have our annual UN Austria symposium, which is essentially a climate symposium, which will take place in, I think it's September in Graz in Austria. But we're doing a lot under the UN umbrella, where in the past, so this is a change that I'm bringing to the office. In the past, most events brought speakers together based on a call to member states to reach out to their networks and submit abstracts. I don't want to do that anymore. I want to identify, what are the questions that we need to ask, that we need to find answers to, and then convene the right people. So one thing I would say is that it's great to for us to be in contact with ERSC, for example, to help figure out who are the right players to bring around the table on key issues. That's one thing. Secondly, if you are a company which is a provider of data and you do want to explore entering some kind of a commitment with us where you make in-kind contributions, you look good by doing that. And if you share it for crises and so on, that can then lead to us. We can then promote the company and what we are doing together with them. This already happens with Airbus and I think with Maxar, and it promotes it within the UN system, but also through our events. I think one thing that we could do is we could maybe come to you more often when we know that there are RFPs within the UN system for procurement of Earth observation data, which I don't know if that's happened in the past, but this does happen. There's a lot of procurement of data, and I don't know if that comes on your radar, obviously, but we can do that. And perhaps ERSC can also promote UNOOSA's role amongst its membership and organize also consultations. Maybe you can come to us with questions that your community has, and we can see how to bring that into a UNOOSA Space Bridge roundtable or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that can certainly be done. We have, for instance, we have a working group looking at the SDGs and the contribution from space, which can maybe complement work you're doing. Jan, I put your question. Did you get an answer to that question? Was that okay, or do you want to add to it?
It was very helpful indeed. Thank you very much.
Thanks. So, Luisella, do you want to come in and ask about Copernicus?
Yes. First of all, Arti, thank you very much for this presentation, and congratulations on your appointment. You touch upon the Earth observation data policy, and as you know, that the Copernicus has a free data policy worldwide. So it's really a great opportunity, untapped opportunity, perhaps in many areas. And well, I'm working for the European Space Agency, so we have a European context, but UNOOSA has a worldwide context, and so it's really the enabler, maybe in many respects, of being able to, let's say, foster the opportunity of use this data, create services, create applications. And so how do you see this role?
I would say two things here. The first is, in my conversations with Josef Aschbacher, also he said, the data is there, it's available, it's free. We make sure of that. The feedback that I'm receiving, or at least the issues that are being brought to my attention in the bilateral meetings, is we can't afford data. I know this is free, but the message seems to be that the most actionable data is the high resolution data. So I guess that the available data is not necessarily actionable for specific uses that member states may have in mind. Obviously, it's actionable for other uses, but I suppose that it's not actionable for what they have in mind. Another issue is the lack of knowledge of how to access the data and how to interpret the data, how to use it. And that's where we will where I really hope to step up our capacity building with the member states. And this is an important area where we can collaborate with other organizations and industry. And that's also being pushed by some member states. I mentioned the BRICS consortium putting up their joint constellation. They're like, how can we make sure that this actually gets into the hands of those who need it? And that's where, it falls on us. That's our responsibility to bridge that gap. So I hope that we will play an increasing role. I hope that this is an area. So we're presenting a strategy, and this is a strategy of how we can deliver on the expectations of member states, the expectation of the UN as a whole. Let me digress for 1 second. You may or may not know that there's going to be something called the Summit of the Future happening in September in New York. So maybe you heard that there was a summit for the SDGs that happened in September 23 in New York. The line in the declaration that came out of that on space for the SDGs was lost in the negotiations. So in New York, member states, negotiating hard on what lines should go in there, global priorities, heads of state meeting, space got lost. So there's no line on space for the SDGs necessarily in that. I know that Laurent will say that there's plenty of other references, and there are, but still, at the highest level, there wasn't. The Summit of the Future is calling on COPUS to make recommendations now on key areas of space governance, but it's really an opportunity for us to again highlight why we need to move on these issues of governance. And the reason why is the SDGs, it's climate change. It's precisely what we're discussing in this event here. So many member states have been saying to us that, you have the one side which says, we can't access it, we can't afford it, we don't know where to get it. And the other side that says, we have it, we want to make it available, we want to give you, we want to support UNOOSA in bridging that gap. So we don't have much budget in the UN budget, but we do hope, it is my hope, that when we present this strategy, that we can articulate this kind of need in a way that resonates with member states, and that they then donate to us to support that capacity building to bridge this gap. That's the intention. And I've been told that all this enthusiasm will be slapped out of me soon enough.
Well,
No, absolutely. Don't give up.
Behind you, Artie.
Don't
We're
give
behind.
up. You should go on. Don't give up. And indeed, you nail it in terms of what the problem is, which is creating applications. And so having the knowledge locally and having the services locally is not just the raw data, sort of to say, is building on it. Which is also complicated. So having the raw data, the free data policy is a huge advantage, but it's not the end of the story. There is much more that needs to be done.
I think there's also value, and I think this could be quite important, that we actually articulate where are the obstacles. So one is accessing affordable data. One is knowing, the capacity building, how do we interpret it? How do we use it? We should try to together articulate what are the obstacles, what are the pain points, so that in our program we address them.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much for addressing the question. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, and thanks, Erin, for pointing the link to valuables. This is also so recognized under it's part of the GeoValue activity. We bring the SEBS activity, and NASA, USGS bring the valuables, and they're complementary in using different approaches to valuation. And there is a repository which brings together a lot of the case studies. Okay, are there any other questions that people want to come in? Otherwise, we could carry on chatting all evening, I'm sure, but we'll perhaps bring it to a close. Wolfhard, I see you're indicating. Come on.
I have a question about lesser developed countries, especially in, let's say, Africa or part of Southeast Asia. What can UNOOSA actually do to level the playing field for these countries, and especially for the space sectors in these countries, to really emerge and play a role internationally? Let's say, for instance, in Africa, there's a couple states and countries in Africa that have their own space program now, and really fast emerging space nations. At the same time, they don't have the big anchor clients like the US DoD to feed billions into them. To grow small startups or small companies to really compete internationally. And it would also be beneficial if those countries would have a better developed space sector, even for SMEs in Europe. Let's say, for instance, GAF is doing, from Munich, is doing a lot of business in Africa. If they have more partners locally that would be supported by international programs and would actually be able to compete against the big shots from North America, that would mean a benefit for everybody. Is there anything UNOOSA could do?
Sure, sure, and we already are. So I don't think it's so much about enabling them to compete globally. I really don't like the fact that everything is perceived as a global competition and a race and this and that. I think it's really about using global solutions to enable action locally. So what we do have, we have a program called Access to Space for All. Okay, so we have helped non-spacefaring nations become spacefaring nations. How have we done that? We work with, we have, like, let me give you one example. We have a partnership with JAXA. It's called COPUS, where we invite teams to bid, and we have helped Guatemala, Moldova, Kenya, Mauritius, another one I don't remember, launched their first satellites. Typically, those satellites are CubeSats or some kind of small satellite, which is in the EO field. It's all about Earth observation. Why? Because they want to address an agriculture issue or something locally. Now, the impact of that, yes, it might be small. It's not small nationally. It's a very big deal. And in Kenya, what happened, we saw that it actually triggered their space economy. It did huge benefits for STEM. It triggered this creation of a space economy to the point that the country is now launching its own second satellite, which it developed by itself and not in partnership with JAXA. Right? So that is very much one of our programs that we do, which I think goes some way to addressing the question that you raised, I hope.
Just, yeah, to a certain point, yeah, and that is very much appreciated. And I see the benefits, and I see the progress that's being made in Africa, working also with South African and other African companies. But at the same time, what really still worries me is that just focus on South Africa for a moment. There are fantastic small companies, startups, but they simply don't have any possibility even to compete within Africa against the big giants that come in from, let's say, North America, for instance, and just simply outcompete them on the basis that these companies in South Africa don't have the funds to do the necessary development, to do the technological development, even for in-country or intra-African applications. So that is what still worries me a little.
Okay, I would just say that what we do for all of our events, literally all of them, we have under our UN budget something called a fellowship program. And for every event we do, we fly in chosen people from less developed countries. They are not allowed to be government officials. They can be SMEs and so on, and many of them are, that they can come and participate in our events and benefit from the capacity building, the exchange of information, and also a lot of training that we do. And we do that on a dedicated basis, and it's very much part of our mandate. We have to do that, and we do that on an annual basis. So I mean, look, we're small, so we do what we can. I believe what we do makes an impact. It may not be at scale, but it can only get better.
Well,
okay, thank you very much for that.
We look forward to that, Artie, and hearing.
We have to talk about COP before we end.
Oh, okay. I was just about to end, so.
I know, but you have to talk about COP.
Have to talk about COP. Please talk about COP.
So I went to COP, my first ever COP. I was mortified. So there's satellite imagery everywhere. They don't know there's a climate crisis without us. So there's satellite imagery everywhere. But space is a sideshow. It's like it's like the crisis, the climate crisis is an event that's happening, and the space sector provides the tech support by bringing photography. Okay, we have to be embedded by design into the program of COP. There was a big show on COP on space at the last COP in Dubai, but thanks to the UAE Space Agency, and so it was space talking with space largely, but at least it was there. And going forward, we as a community have got to impose on our governments that they find ways of putting us more into the program. We will do what we can, working with UNEP and UNFCCC for the next one. But I did want to pass that message. And I think another thing which is really important, I was sitting at COP, there was a space agency leadership summit. I was in Dubai for WRC and for COP. And every space agency leader was making some kind of a pledge. And they had no idea that, 3 kilometers down the road, the SAR frequencies were potentially up for grabs by IMT. They had no idea. And how is that possible? How is that possible? So I think we need to do better. We need to tell the story better. Earth observation and this stuff is perceived as, one of those things which is just there in the background. There's nothing sexy about it. It's not 5G.
We have to get beyond images. I mean, you said there are images everywhere, and that's the perception. But we have to get beyond that into what the outcome is, what the result of having access to those images is. It's not about having a nice picture on the wall. It's about being able to save lives, or be able to produce more food, or to understand better how the coast erosion is.
I think there's two aspects to that. One goes back to Julia's point about the metrics and that kind of stuff, because numbers talk. And the second part is telling our story better. We have to do that. And that's one of the things I would like to do at COPUS. Not because we need to for COP or anything else, but simply because that's the way to remind member states of why they're here, why they come to COPUS. They're not there because they need to watch what the neighbor is doing in terms of governance or space security aspects. Everybody is around the table because they wanted to promote the benefits of space for all. And so I think that's an opportunity to tell our story and remind them every time.
Okay, that's a great closing message, I think. Thank you very much for being with us, and thank you for articulating so well the role of UNOOSA and COPUS, and what we can look forward to in the future. And please, as we've said, we're very happy to interact further. I've got if you can stay with us. We normally finish with just an open session where anybody can just jump in and open their microphone depending on how much time. But just before we get to that point, I always have to announce the next EOcafe will be in 2 weeks' time. I'll come to that. Expandio is the European Earth Observation Conference. It's the unmissable conference that we organise in Brussels. It's alongside our own AGM. You should all come this year. We'll be talking about internationalisation. We'll be talking about commercialisation, and more generally about how to develop the market. What are the key drivers for growth? We'll also be talking about public markets in Europe. So there's a lot of material that will be addressed, and it's a 2-day meeting, the 12th, 13th of June in Brussels. There'll also it's our 35th anniversary of ERSC. 10 years ago, we celebrated our 25th anniversary, and we introduced the ERSC Awards. So that it's 10 years of ERSC Awards, and it's the 5th year of Expandio. So it's quite a special year. And we hope to be celebrating that with you. And what I was going to conclude with is there will be rather than having all the awards decided sort of remotely, we're going to have one of the awards, the startup award, divided through live pitching, so that companies will be invited to pitch, and the audience will be able to decide the award. So for small companies, it will be an excellent opportunity to make their presence known. So registration's open. Please join us for the conference. Secondly, it's that time of year, the industry survey. This is the survey that we do of the Earth observation services industry. So we want all companies involved, however small the role may be, in Earth observation services to respond to the survey. Tell us a little bit about yourself. It doesn't take too long. You can answer the first few questions and then drop off if you wish. But of course, we'd like you to go to the end and learn more about your activities. And this is really important information for the decision makers in Brussels. And I guess ultimately for RT as well, because it's saying what the industry is doing, what the priorities are doing, looking at the trends in the industry. So please, if you're a company based in Europe, doing some form of Earth observation services, then please respond. And then finally, the next EOcafe. Yes, as you know, it's every 2 weeks. So in 2 weeks' time, 8th of February, and we'll be talking with Mercator Ocean about the Copernicus Marine Service, and particularly around the coast and Arctic activities, and what opportunities there will be for industry coming out of it. There are a number of ITTs which are being planned, so come and listen to that and talk with Mercator about the Copernicus Marine Service. That's the end of the publicity. Just thank you all for being with us. Thanks again very much to Artie for being our guests and articulating so well. And hope to see you soon.
Thank you.